Okay, this tutorial will take you through building your inventory of assets for event sponsorship. I've had to do it or cut this whole tutorial into 3 sections because I've had some issues with synchronizing audio and video together, and this seems to be the best way to do it, to make them in shorter videos. So this first video will go through some background information on the inventory itself and CPM value. Okay, so just to answer some basic questions about the inventory. First up is, why are we putting you through all this? Why do we make you do it? Okay, so to answer this, we'll go back to some fundamentals about sponsorship. We know, or at least we're fast learning, that sponsorship is a complex process. But we go through this complex process because it allows, or hopefully allows, our events to make a financial gain. And the inventory within sponsorship is a critical component because it gives us the information that we need to maximize our return and most effectively manage event sponsorship. So this leads to our next question, which is, how does the inventory do this? Well, to answer that, and primarily, the inventory focuses in on 2 things which are of managerial interest in particular. The first of these things is the value of our saleable assets. So it calculates the value of the assets we have that we can sell to sponsors. Secondly, it also calculates and maintains a record of the external costs of producing and selling those assets to our sponsors. Note that it says external costs. We're not interested in internal costs. We're only interested in this inventory that we're building with the external fees and charges that we'll have to outlay to produce and maintain our assets. So from these 2 pieces of information, if we subtract costs from value, it provides us with the net revenue the sponsorship will, or sponsorship in general, will produce to the event. This is important stuff for managers. We need to know what the net revenue generated from our activities are. That's not all it does though. It also produces many other positive benefits to events and sponsorship managers in particular. One of those is that it ensures our assets are not undersold, or maybe worse, oversold. For example, if we sell more signage space than we actually have, that can get us into all sorts of trouble. It also provides major benefits when we get to the targeting and sales and negotiation stages of the sponsorship process. And it provides a record for new staff coming in of suppliers and the calculations and methods used for valuing our assets. And there are others as well, and we'll get to those as we go through the lectures. So the next question becomes, how do you build an inventory of assets? Okay, so there's 2 things. You need to have a sound understanding of CPM, which is the currency of advertising value. Very important that you understand how to calculate that. And then we just apply a relatively simple process to building our inventory. You can make this process as complex as you like, but the one we show you is fairly basic and it can be further developed from there. So this CPM, okay, how do you calculate CPM? Now I'll just refer over to our background document that was put on the web for you. And this first section of the document just gives a really brief introduction to CPM. Notes that in broadcast media we often see CPP, but it's easily converted to CPM, and CPM is the typical currency value that we refer to when we're trying to compare advertising. These links I've provided you here, the first one and the third one, they provide you with some information on CPM. This is a little bit dated, it's 2007, but it still remains a good explanation of how CPM is calculated and how it can be used. And one of the ways and examples it shows down here is we talk about a Super Bowl ad. So over in the States, one 30-second spot during the Super Bowl will cost you $2.6 million. Compare that with a approximately $6,500 insertion into a Columbus newspaper. How could you compare the two? Well, that's what CPM value does, and this sounds like it's a completely different ballpark to our Columbus newspaper. However, when we look at CPM value and calculate it out, the Super Bowl ad actually comes out cheaper per 1,000 impressions than does the Columbus newspaper. This doesn't necessarily mean that one is better than the other just because it has a higher or lower CPM. There are other factors that you need to take into consideration as well, as the article goes on to explain. But as a benchmarking and comparison thing, CPM value is very good. For example, if you're thinking of advertising in two newspapers, if one's got a lower CPM and they have a similar audience, well then that would seem to be more cost effective on the face of things. So calculating our CPM, we'll go back to our slideshow. Oh, sorry about that. Alright, so we have this equation which is in those articles. It's simply two things we need to know: the value of the advertising and the number of impressions. And we can calculate CPM by multiplying the value of the advertising times 1,000 and divide it by the number of impressions. So that's all well and good. Sometimes we don't know the value of our advertising and we want to actually calculate the CPM, because we do need to know both the CPM and the value of all our assets that we sell to sponsors. So in that case, we just rearrange the equation. If we're solving for value, we use a CPM rate times the number of impressions and divide that by 1,000, and that will give us the value of our advertising asset. The one or two constant things, obviously we have our $1,000 value there, that's constant in both these equations. The other thing that you need to know about all your advertising assets is the number of impressions. So the I is constant. So therefore that becomes one of the first things that you need to know about all your advertising assets, is how many impressions are going to see this ad. We can then either apply a predetermined CPM to calculate the value, or if we know the value of the ad, we can then calculate the CPM value. Okay, hopefully that's not too confusing, and I need you to understand how those equations work and how we use them. Going back to our document, the other two links, we've got the one down the bottom here, which is just another article explaining cost per 1,000, and the cost per point, which is used in broadcast media. And this shows that cost per point can be easily converted back to CPM, and it also gives you some reasoning behind why advertisers use cost per point when they're talking about broadcast media. So if you look through those and consider those equations that I've just done, you should have a pretty good idea of how CPM works and how you can calculate it. This middle link that I've provided you is simply a calculator, and this calculator here, it's limited in the fact that it only provides one of the equations. So it assumes you know the cost of the ad or value of the ad and then the number of impressions, and it will calculate the CPM value. So essentially that calculator performs this equation here. This equation here. It calculates the CPM value once you know the value of the ad and the number of impressions. Sometimes we need to work the other way around. That's why you need this second equation as well. For example, with our assets, within the event we set a CPM value for the asset and then calculate the value we're going to sell that asset to our sponsors. So there we go. Hopefully, and I went to the wrong one again, should have been on this screen, sorry about that. So hopefully all of that little background gives you an understanding of why the inventory is important and how we calculate this thing we call CPM and how it can be used in the context of advertising value.